If it's your first time at the Way, you picked a great Sunday. Today we're looking at Jesus' teaching on lust and adultery. And you can imagine, we're part of a teaching team, so I teach about once a month. And so for about 3 or 4 weeks, I live in a text. And so I see the assignment out in front, and I study, and I read, I pray. And what was interesting is about a week ago, so I'm a week or two into letting this sort of like steep my imagination, I get a text from a dad, a good friend of mine, a great dad, and his son is turning 13. And he does this amazing thing. I love how intentional this dad is. He goes, I've asked a bunch of adult figures in my son's life, people he loves and who love him, to speak a word to him, to say happy birthday, to acknowledge the journey he's on in becoming a man, the man God made him to be, and to speak to a specific topic. Can you guess what he asked me to speak to him about? He said, can you share something with him about sex and God's design for sex? And do it in 90 seconds. My first try was 4 minutes. My second try was 3 minutes. I just sent it. So you just deal with that. That's not a reasonable assignment. And I'd love for you to think about the question that I wrestled with. What would 13-year-old you need to hear about sex and sexual integrity? What would be helpful? What would be edifying? What does a 13-year-old boy today need to hear? And I love what this father is doing because this is such an important topic. It's such a big part of what it means to be human. We have to talk about these matters. And here's what's interesting. Unfortunately, many parents and caregivers, we've subcontracted talking about sex and intimacy to YouTube, to TV, and movies. Children are learning more about sex from TikTok videos, secular educators, and from their 13-year-old friends than they are from healthy adults who love them and want what's best for them. We've got to talk about it. It's so important. And you and I, we need to talk about it because each one of us, I want you to hear this, each one of us, whether you're 13 years old or 80 years old, we need a formed, nuanced, thoughtful ethic on sex. Whether you're a religious person or not, because this is so central to what it means to be human. You know that, I know this. It's such a big part of our society. You can't just be casual about it. You need to have a set of guidelines and principles by which you navigate sex. And so I just want to ask you, do you have a set of guidelines and principles that you can live by? We need a sex ethic that's nuanced and really accounts for the true nature of sex. In other words, we need an ethic that works, that brings life and wholeness, not destruction and pain. And today we get a little window, just a little window into the Christian ethic on sex through Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. And so here's what I want to do today. 3 parts. We might not have time for all 3. The first part's the most important. I want to unpack the text. I want to just look at the verses that we looked at. I think there's 3 verses there. I want to define the word adultery. I want to understand the word lust. And then I want to tap into this idea of what is Jesus getting on about gouging out your eye so that you're not thrown into hell. We're going to try to tackle that. And then if we have time, and I'd love to do this if we have time, I want to talk specifically about pornography. And then I want to anchor this whole thing in the way Jesus treats people in sexual sin. Because we have these examples in the Gospels of how Jesus treats people like you and I who are sexually broken. And in order to understand what Jesus is saying and doing, in order to really experience it, has to be rooted in the sound of his voice, in the countenance of his face. And this side note probably goes without saying, but we're limited in the context of a Sunday morning to really tackle all that there is to say. If I had more time, I'd want to unpack the whole Christian sex ethic, not just talking about lust and adultery. I want to give you a window into the beauty and nuance and empowerment of the Christian sex ethic, the dignity involved with it. If we had more time, I'd also want to talk about how much the church has gotten this conversation wrong. We have not got 10 out of 10 on this one. I don't think we've even got 5 out of 10 on this one. If you grew up in church like me, this conversation is associated with shame, guilt, massive seasons of ignoring the topic, and then extreme attention to the topic at the wrong moments, and overemphasizing one part over another. So if I had more time, I'd want to deconstruct that and then rebuild it, but we don't have that time. And if I had more time, I'd want to just talk on and on and on about stories of freedom and grace and restoration. Because for all the stories of brokenness and pain that I hear as a pastor, I'm seeing stories again and again and again of people finding new life, wholeness. There's no one who's disqualified. You're not at the end of your story. So let's look at the text. Let's look at verses 27 and 28 to start. It says this. It says, "You've heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." And so this text has a simple structure. It's the "you've heard it said" and the "but I tell you." And this actually, the whole section of scripture this is part of, from verses 21 all the way through the end of the chapter, follows this structure. And you can see it on the screen. Talking about murder last week. You've heard it said, "Do not murder." And then Jesus comes in to say, "But I tell you." And listen to what Jesus is doing on murder, adultery, breaking your oath, revenge. He wants to move us to a deeper work. Jesus is not satisfied with just surface level change. He doesn't want to just change your actions. He wants to change your heart. And so let's look at murder to anger. He moves from murder to the deeper matter of anger. Jesus is saying, I don't want to just stop you from murdering people. I want to heal you of the anger that boils beneath the surface of your life. We'll look in a few weeks at oaths and truth-telling in verses 33 to 37. And you can see in the movement to the heart, the deeper issue that Jesus is going after. He's saying, I don't want you just to keep the contracts that you sign. That's important. But I don't want you just to be a contract keeper. I want to make you a truth teller whose words carry weight and integrity. The week after that, we'll talk about revenge and love for your enemy. And you see what Jesus is doing. He moves from not taking revenge to loving of your enemy. He's saying, I know it's one thing to not take revenge, but I want to make you the kind of person who's so full of love and free of hate that you love your enemies. He's after your heart. He wants to transform you from the inside out. So he starts by affirming the seventh commandment. You shall not commit adultery. You might have heard of the 10 commandments before. These are the very important instruction for the people of Israel. And very quickly, you need to imagine that the people of Israel were under slavery for many, many generations, many, many years, multiple generations. They come out of slavery, and they're set apart as God's people. And he speaks words of life and guidelines and instructions to them, a new ethic for life as God's people. And the seventh commandment says, you shall not commit adultery. And so what Jesus is doing here is affirming that commandment and then building on it and going deeper. So what is adultery? Adultery is a sexual relationship or encounter between someone who's married and a person they're not married to. Adultery is an act that undermines the covenant of marriage. And adultery is an act that destroys lives. I have a good friend who practices family law in the city of Vancouver. And whenever we spend time together, I often ask, how's work going? And it's, some of you have professions like this. You know, maybe you're a police officer, you work in the hospital right now, and when it's busy, it's bad. Some people, you like trade stocks or something, or you're in sales, and you're like, it's busy, it's good. But for family law, for nurses, for VPD, busy's not good. It means there's more heartache and pain. So for her, it's been really busy the last 2 years. And she's so wise and so thoughtful. And one of the things that she's explained to me about adultery and divorce is just the carnage it has on the whole family. One of the things I've heard her said before is no one wins. Like no one wins in this deal. It's like the spouse who was cheated on, the one who cheated, and the kids, everyone. It's carnage. And she explains that it goes beyond there. It's businesses that break. It's not just families, it's communities. And I've seen up close, it's even churches that break. The ripple out effects of adultery are savage. And when I talk to her, another thing seems to emerge that's, I think, just worthy of note. Is she's noted to me that, like, over COVID, issues of separation and broken families and even adultery have increased. And that's interesting. And I think there's lots of reasons for this. But I think it's worth noting this. Because it reminds me that adultery almost never happens, maybe sometimes, but almost never happens because somebody wants to blow up their family. It happens because of pain, isolation, loneliness, lack of intimacy, deep hurt, and confusion. And this doesn't justify it, but it shows that it's not as simple as sometimes we want to make these issues. And it points to the reality that the answer to the question of adultery has to be a deeper issue, a deeper healing, a deeper work is needed. A ministry that goes to the core of who we are and the core of our hearts. We need the work that Jesus brings, his healing, his life. We need his wholeness at the core of who we are. So Jesus moves deeper. That's the point. He moves deeper. He says, you've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you, verse 28, that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, this is about both men and women. In the broader context, he's using the specific example of a man looking at a woman, but this is for all of us. He's speaking about a gaze of men and women towards others. This is for all of us. And what Jesus is doing in this moment is he's going upstream from adultery. He's saying, I want to get to the source of what causes it. Before there's an action with your body, there's a movement in your mind and your heart. There's an adultery of your heart before your body. But I think he's doing more than just preventing adultery. He is doing that. He wants to move upstream. He wants to get to the source. But he's doing more than that. This is about how we see one another. And this is about setting our hearts free from patterns of sexual compromise that are moving us towards destruction and away from freedom. Listen to how Eugene Peterson paraphrases this in the Message. He says, you know the next commandment pretty well too. Don't go to bed with another's spouse. But don't think that you've preserved your virtue by simply staying out of bed. Your heart can be corrupted by lust even quicker than your body. Those ogling looks you think nobody noticed, they also corrupt. And this is interesting. What is the corruption that goes on when we allow and embrace lustful looks? What's the corrosive effect of it on our hearts? This is what Jesus is after. I want to do a bit more work defining the term. What is this lustful look? Let me tell you what it's not. A lustful look is not the same as being attracted to someone. Someone's like, whew. It's like, oh my goodness. A lustful look is not the same as noticing or appreciating beauty. And lust is not the same as sexual desire. These are not like equivalent terms. You can't replace these terms. It's not even the same as longing for the connectedness that comes from intimacy. In fact, these things that I mentioned, being attracted to someone, appreciating beauty, sexual desire, and longing for intimacy and connectedness, these are God-given desires. Period. And they're part of being human. But lust is a subversion of these God-given desires. Lust twists them in on themselves. Lust hijacks those God-given desires and twists them inwards in a way that is damaging for the one who is lusting and in a way that is dehumanizing for the person being lusted after. The word being translated as lust here is in the Greek epithumeo, and it means to have a desire for, to long for something. And at the heart of this word, it's about having and taking something for yourself. Lust says, I must have that thing for myself. And specifically, in the area of sexual temptation, I must have that thing that is not my own. That's the point. It's not yours. I must have that thing. Same with adultery. It's not yours. I must have that thing that is not my own. It's about taking that which is not your own for yourself. Carries this idea of possession. Lust says, I must have that for my own gratification. And as a result, lust transforms people into objects that are used for our own pleasure. And this fundamentally undermines the value and worth of every human being. You know, to really understand all of Christian ethics, and specifically the ethics we're talking about this morning around sex and lust and adultery, it's really helpful to go to the first principles of the Bible. And what I mean is to go to the very first pages of Scripture. Because the first pages of Scripture, Genesis chapter 1 and 2, all the way through to 11, lays the foundation for everything else that we'll read. And the beginning of Scripture invites us into the creation narrative where a good creator God makes this world, and then he makes man and woman, you and I, in his image. And the church calls this the doctrine of the Imago Dei, which means in the image of God. And what this means is that every human being is infinitely precious and valuable. Every single person. Because they're made in the image of God, followers of Jesus believe that from conception to their last breath, every person is infinitely valuable. Every race, every gender. Regardless of competencies, IQ, appearances, infinitely valuable, infinitely precious. Every single person carries the fingerprints of the Creator God and was made by God. And this core foundational belief about every human being fuels the Christian worldview and Christian ethics. This is why Christians condemn racism. This is why they condemn adultery. This is why they condemn pornography. This is why Christians condemn slavery, condemns abortion, condemns eugenics, condemns chauvinism, and even condemns lustful looks, because all of them undermine the Imago Dei. Lust turns people into objects. It dehumanizes them and treats them not as image bearers of God to be cherished, but as commodities. Now, that's a lot. That's heavy. And it's hard to reconcile that with the day-to-day experience as a human being in a sexually charged culture who, if you're like me, feels like almost impossible to imagine not having lustful thoughts. Like, how do we reconcile the intensity of what's going on here and the clarity by which Jesus is speaking and the commonplaceness of this? And think about other things that are talked about in this chapter of Scripture. Anger, lust, truth-telling, love for enemies. All of these things are things that you can't just flip on and off like a switch. Right? Like, I heard Alita's sermon last week about this like brooding anger beneath the surface. And I was like, yes, I want to be free of that. And so I can try my darndest this week, but I can't just flip the switch, right? Like, I can't just switch it over and never be angry again. And I think the same is true of lustful desires. And so what do you do? What do you do with an instruction of Jesus that feels like this unattainable or feels so like far from your experience? And so if it's not a switch, like if it's not something you can just flip on or off, then we need a better picture. And the picture I want to submit to you is the picture of a compass. You are charting the course of your life in a trajectory. There is a momentum and movement to your formation and to your life. And I want to invite you this morning, in light of the reality that this feels like a high bar, don't dismiss it as impossible. Set the compass of your life in that direction. Don't think about a switch. Think about it as a compass, true north. Jesus is saying, my desire for you is that you would be free of lustful thoughts. And it's too complex. Like, it's too built into the wiring of our brains, our human experience, the world we're in, just to flip it off. So we need the deep work over time of transformative formation by the love of God at work in our lives. And here's what I've noticed. I've noticed that I can assess the momentum in my life in these areas. Am I becoming more of a truth teller, or am I allowing dishonesty to seep in again and again and again? Am I becoming more and more a person of peace who's slow to anger, or am I becoming more and more easily angered? Do you know what I mean? And I think it's worth us pausing and saying, where's the momentum in our life going? And I think this is a really helpful way to think about lustful thoughts. Where's the momentum going? What's the current of the stream? And what I want to encourage you this morning is you can change the course of the momentum. That's what Jesus wants to do. And his spirit is moving in the direction of freedom. And so we're invited, if I can switch more metaphors from streams to wind, the wind of the Spirit is moving in the trajectory of seeing people as image bearers of God. And so set your sails to the wind of the Spirit. Set your sails. Say, God, yes, I know I can't change this overnight, but I want to set the sails of my life, my actions, my thoughts, my repentance, my rhythms in the trajectory that you're leading. I started hanging out with my good friend, Chris Hall, and talking about our own journey with sexual purity at least 13 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. We were roommates before I got married, and we used to hang out every day. We lived together. And now we've all got kids and lives, but we still make time to connect in person every few months and on the phone at least once a month. And we talk about lots of things. And we talk about how we're doing in this area. And recently we're going for a walk and we're sharing and chatting. And there's a few things that stood out that I want to let you in on. One was, if I could go back and tell myself 15 years ago just how faithful God is to transform me from the inside out, it'd be deeply encouraging. Like, as we're talking, there was kind of this moment of like, it's true. Like, God does it. He does renew our minds. He does change us from the inside out. And so there's a sense of like, wow, God's doing it. But there's also this sense, there's a sense of like, I'm not where I was, but there's also a sense of like, man, I also thought maybe 15 years into this, I would have this totally settled. I mean, I thought I'd be raising the dead by now, to be honest. I was sure, like, when I was a teenager who got saved, I was like, by the time I'm 30, I'll have the whole Bible memorized. I will have raised the dead, and I will have zero struggle with sexual temptation. And so there's this reality of it, where we hold in tension the reality, like, wow, God's been faithful, I'm not where I was. But the journey's not done. It's not complete. And sometimes when we find ourselves in moments where it feels like a stumble, it feels like a fall. And I'm saying, Chris, bro, like, I wish I didn't even have to bring this up. He's very quick to remind me, but Jay, think about where you were. Think about what God's doing. And I just wanted to invite you into that. I don't know if today is year 12 on your journey or day 1. But God's really faithful. And it is a journey. And the journey starts by naming it. By having the courage to name it. To not shine away from what Jesus is saying, but to say, He desires life and love for me. And His Spirit is at work in my heart to bring me on a journey of transformation. So it starts by naming it. Receiving God's love and grace and forgiveness. This journey is not marked by being beat up more and more and more. Shame and guilt do not bring long-term transformation. What I've experienced is it's God's grace and love, His forgiveness and kindness that has moved me to repentance and has fueled a long-term journey. And this journey, part of this journey, includes reordering your life around the teaching of Jesus. Let's go back to the text. It says this. It says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Jesus is saying, don't be casual about this stuff. Don't be afraid of it costing you something in the pursuit of sexual integrity. You're better off losing your eye or your hand than going down the hellish path that lust leads to. And this is strong imagery. Eyes being pulled out, hands being cut off, being thrown into hell. But I think the topic deserves the weighty imagery. Is Jesus being literal here? No. He's using hyperbole to make it a very important point. The point is clear, though. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. If there's conviction in your heart this morning, do not be afraid to take radical measures when it comes to dealing with lust. You don't treat cancer with a Band-Aid. When my brother was fighting cancer, first it was surgery, crazy invasive. The hair still hasn't grown back on the patch of his head that they shaved and did stitches and cut open to remove it from his brain. Then it was radiation. Body still doesn't feel the same 5 years later. And then chemotherapy. Many rounds of chemotherapy. But what would he say? Worth it. When the stakes are high, you take radical measures, even at great personal cost. And in this moment, Jesus is raising the stakes on the end result. Because he's saying, you see where this leads, right? I know this image of hell is confronting for us, but it's not as complicated as we need to make it. You follow the thread of evil desires, and it leads to increased darkness, increased decay, which leads to death. It says, follow the thread. Eventually, you'll get the thing that comes from doing this thing. It says, don't lose your whole life to darkness and decay. I have come to set you free, to move you from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light. And we can be on a trajectory in our lives towards increased freedom, increased life, increased liberty in Jesus. And so the stakes are high. So let's not be casual about it. So what does it look like to cut things off that cause you to stumble? I want to invite you in this moment to really consider this question. What is causing you to stumble? Specifically in the area of lust. And as I think about this, like, what does it mean? Like, what does it mean to take his teaching of seriously? What I kind of want to lay before you is it has to mean something. Like something concrete. Like we need to move. I think what Jesus wants to do with the cutting off of the hand and the gouging of the eye is move us from abstract to concrete. Like to take it seriously enough. Like it has to mean sometimes walking out of a movie. It's got to mean sometimes turning off the show. It's got to mean sometimes deleting the app or ending the relationship or telling someone else what's going on. It has to move from abstract to our day-to-day lives. Because when you start taking seriously the journey with Jesus, you begin to audit your life. And even really practically, I'll just grab one example. You begin to think about the media you consume. We live in a fascinating age. We live in the visual age. Every day we see tens of thousands of images on the highest quality screens that have ever existed in human history in our pocket. And these images are immersive and dynamic, and they form us. We live in the age of entertainment and content. No other age in history have we consumed as much content between meetings, between our normal activities than we do in this moment. We're consuming so much content, and it forms us. It shapes us. I was thinking this week about the formative power of the images and stories and movies and content that we consume. And I've experienced it with my son Hudson. His little brain, like, we're walking down Robson Street, and there was like a group doing, I don't know, I think they were like protesting something. They had these screens with these really visual images, and they were like, it was really visual. They were like, I think they were like advocating against mistreatment of animals, and that was years ago. Huddy was way down Robson Street, and I was trying to cover him, and he saw it for a split second, and he's brought it up almost every month since. He can't shake that image. This week, as I was preparing, I realized that I still haven't forgotten the very first pornographic image I've ever seen. I remember who I was with. I was with some buddies behind a house. It was a different age. There was no cell phone. I remember him pulling out this bag of ripped up pieces of magazine. And this crumpled, faded image is stained in my mind. What we consume matters. What we consume matters. And so I'm going to tell you this morning everything you're allowed to watch and what you're not allowed to watch. And so what I need is like one volunteer who wants to just pull up their Netflix history. We're going to put it up there. And I'm just going to, like, it'll be super fun. Be like, I'll just say yay or nay on each thing. I think that'd be helpful in some ways for me at least. Like, if Daryl could just say, Jay, like, come on, dude, like, you know, and I'd be like, you're right, Daryl. I can't do that for you. I really can't. Like, I can't tell you what you can or cannot watch. I don't even think the language of can or cannot is helpful. I think we need to ask, what is this stuff doing to us? Even though I can't tell you, I have to wrestle with that for myself. Like, I have to draw lines with myself, with my community, with Rach and my closest friends based off of my conscience and my weaknesses. I think the reality is some of you can watch things that I cannot watch and it doesn't have the same effect on you it has on me. And I'm okay with that. This week I was with a number of pastors and we were away, mostly U.S. pastors, and we were away at this kind of retreat. And some people brought like really good whiskey and wine to enjoy at night. And one of the pastors said he wanted to make it a safer environment. He said, hey, just so you guys know, this is great that you guys are enjoying, like please enjoy. He goes, I won't be having any. Here's why. I know I can't just have a little bit. I'll have a lot. And he goes, no, I'm having one of the worst years of my life. And in moments like this, I turn to vices. He says, I know myself well enough to know. So he goes, if there's anyone here like me, I want you to feel safe as well. And I don't know if I'm telling this story very well, but what he did in that moment was acknowledge that when it comes to issues of conscience, it's not always the same for every person. And we tried to oversimplify things. And so it might be good to say, like, are you allowed to watch this or this? But it doesn't work in real time. What has to happen, it's harder than that. Because a model like that where a pastor gets up and says, not this and this, you can agree or disagree, like just, I'll take it or leave it. It doesn't demand anything of you. But I want to invite you in to really wrestle with this. Like, what's it doing to you? Here are the questions that I'm asking myself about the media that I consume. Is this causing me to stumble? Is this fueling healthy or unhealthy desires in me? Is this fueling my intimacy with my wife, Rachel? I also ask questions like, what is this doing to me? Is this making me more joyful or hopeful? Is it helping me see others with more dignity in life? Is this building life and love in me, or is it the opposite? Is this helping me see everyone else as image bearers of God? And if we can wrestle with those questions, no guilt, no shame, we're looking for a deeper work, a deeper motivation. Something that will last. We need to do this deep work of asking these questions. What does this mean for what we consume? So Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And so one of the ways that we can respond today is to ask what needs to change. What needs to be uprooted or cut off? What might you need to pull out of your life to set the trajectory of your life in alignment with the teaching of Jesus? On Thursday, we recorded, Chris and I, the small group material. I'm a little bit embarrassed about part of it. I'll let you guys watch it, and you'll see why Chris is blushing right now. I told them to cut it, and they said, no, we're not cutting it. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. That's just like it's a plug for small groups. We were talking about this gouge of the eye, and I talked to Chris about what it means, and he said something that and he was quoting Dallas Willard. And he said, what's interesting about Jesus' instructions to gouge out your eyes and cut off your arm is even if you did those things, you could still lust. That's interesting, right? So I do think Jesus is saying, take radical measures, audit your life, cut things off, remove them. But there's something else going on here. And Jesus is the master teacher, so it's no surprise that there's multiple layers here. He's making a bit of a joke. He's like, don't you see you need a deeper transformation? Like, don't you see, even if you could remove everything, that the work still needs to happen at the core of who you are? And that's the work that Jesus is most interested in doing. He's saying, even if you do gouge out your eye, you can still lust. The core issue is at a heart level. Jesus is after heart transformation. And walking with Jesus is daily letting his love and forgiveness take deeper and deeper roots in our hearts. Daily letting his word and presence guide us and lead us. This journey that we're invited to be free, it's impossible on our own, but it's the very work that God wants to do in our lives. So, that's the work on the text. How am I doing for time? 9:58. Because I want to do some work on pornography here, and I'm just going to take the time. Let's talk about porn for a few minutes. I want to talk about it because it's really connected with lust and adultery, but also because to ignore pornography would be to ignore the reality that porn is a part of the majority of households represented here. It's a statistical reality. It's an epidemic. And just to be really clear, I'm really full of hope. when it comes to this conversation. My imagination is full of examples of people who've made a decision to name this for what it is and are experiencing liberty and freedom. But porn is an epidemic in our time. It's a health crisis. It should be named as such. It's bad for your mental health. It's bad for our relationships, and it's bad for the world. The data is in. The research is consistent and clear. This is the insanity of it. We have consistent, peer-reviewed research that shows how consistently damaging pornography is for individuals, for communities, and for the world. Let me read a few of the data points. I pulled this from the website fightthenewdrug.org. First, studies have found that frequency of porn consumption correlates with depression, anxiety, stress, and social problems. Porn consumption has been found to influence some consumers' sexual preferences, no surprise there, leaving them wanting what they've seen on screen, and as a result, significantly less satisfied with sex in real life. Do you hear that? Porn is leading to increase or decrease sexual satisfaction. After being exposed to pornography, men reported being less satisfied with their partner's physical appearance, sexual performance, and level of affection, and expressed greater desire for sex without emotional involvement. Some of the effects of pornography include an increased negative attitude towards women, decreased empathy for victims of sexual violence, and an increase in dominating and sexually imposing behavior. And the Department of Justice and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children both recognize that pornography is an element that adds to the serious problem of sex trafficking in our time. The research is clear. It's bad for our mental health. It's bad for our most important relationships, and it's bad for the world. But why then, if porn is such a clear violation of God's standard, it's such a violation of the Imago Dei, and if it's so clear how damaging it is, then why can it still be so prevalent in our lives? First, we've denied the reality of it. We've just turned our eyes on what we know to be true. The data's in. The research is in. I don't think we need to, the data, we've just denied it. It's time just to sort of name it for what it is. This is a health crisis. This is corrosive in my life. But second, and I think more important, the reason why this is still so prevalent is because pornography meets a deeper need temporarily. And I wish I heard this when I was younger. I wish somebody could have said to 13-year-old Jay, like, hey, what you're after. Because eventually it moves from just curiosity to something else. And I wish I understood that the reason why I couldn't just flip the switch on these things was because my heart was longing for connectedness, that I was dealing with shame and insecurity. And somehow, pornography in a moment can bring like a measure of temporary relief from our longings for intimacy and connectedness and love, or an escape from pain, trauma, fear, and insecurity. And I've heard drug users describe drug use in a way that was really surprising. One heroin user described heroin as a warm hug. A warm hug. Because what's going on in that moment is there's a deeper intimacy, a deeper need, a deeper longing, a deeper heart-level need that somehow temporarily the drug meets. And porn is like a drug. While it brings temporary relief, it pulls us deeper and deeper into a life of pain and darkness. That's the vicious cycle of drugs, and it's why porn is a drug. Because it promises one thing, relief from the pain, but it only perpetuates the pain, takes you deeper and deeper into darkness. And so this is why we can't be casual about it, and why we shouldn't try to fight this drug alone. I want to encourage you. You're not alone. Let someone in. I was traveling with two good friends on a ministry trip a couple years ago. And we were hanging out in the hotel room at night, and there's three of us. So one of my friends begins to describe to us his journey with pornography. He says, I've been trapped in this thing since I was really, really young. And he said, I just tried to control it, and I hid it from everyone. But he said that he kind of hit a point in his life when he had a baby girl. He says, I need to deal with this. And so he said, enough's enough. And so he took some radical steps. And he's just telling us this. And we're like, this is all new information for us. And he's like, this has been an addiction for over a decade. And this is what I've done. He goes, I told my wife and my closest friends. I started seeing a counselor. I go to weekly addiction meetings. I've installed software on my phones and my computers. And I do daily check-ins with someone. And I've brought in new spiritual disciplines in my life, daily meditation in scripture, time in prayer. And this is what he says. He goes, I'm a new person. He says, I'm free. And that's not where the story ends. That was one friend in the room. My other friend. All of a sudden, all this is going on because he's had this hidden part of his life. And all of a sudden, this testimony, the vulnerability of the testimony, the honesty of the testimony, and just the reality, oh man, my bro put the work in. He goes, I can't just be casual about this anymore. And so I was texting with my other friend last night about this. And he said, from that moment, I started to put the work in. Began with repentance, bringing it to the light. I remember when he brought me in. Then counseling, weekly meetings, daily accountability, transforming his digital infrastructure to limit temptation, doing freedom session, the deep work. And this is what he said last night when we were texting. He says, I haven't been perfect since then. You know that, bro. Far from it. But I'm not the man I was. My relationship with lust and pornography has totally changed. It's changed my life and the lives of those closest to me. I'm full of hope. I'm full of hope. We locked the doors. You know that? Shame and guilt, they're not allowed in. We made a deal with shame and guilt. We said, you're not welcome in the room. That's not what we're into this morning. It's about freedom. It's about life. You're not being judged. You're not alone. Here's my final thought as I close. I want to close by anchoring ourselves in Jesus, the person and work of Jesus. Because in order to really hear what Jesus is saying, we cannot separate the Sermon on the Mount from the one who is giving the Sermon on the Mount. Does that make sense? What I mean to say is you can't take Jesus' words and teaching and separate them from his heart and his life. If you do, you'll miss the point. Because when you encounter the heart of Jesus towards us, towards you this morning, when you encounter the heart of Jesus towards you this morning, you'll experience his teaching in a whole new way. What does Jesus feel towards those who fall short? How does he treat someone who falls short of his teaching? We know the answer. He treats them with great love, great mercy, and great dignity. In John chapter 8, verses 1 to 11, we're invited into a moment in Jesus' life. Some of you may know this story. The religious leaders of the day, they wanted to test Jesus. They wanted to put Jesus on the spot. And it's a really painful scene. If I didn't know the ending, I hate reading it because there's so much hypocrisy and corruption involved, and it's so shameful. And so the religious leaders, they find this woman who's caught, the text says, in the act of adultery, right in the act. And they essentially drag her in front of a crowd. So much shame, so much embarrassment. And they say she deserves to be punished. And all the people in the crowd, they're in. They're ready to get in on it, on the punishment. They're surrounding her. And Jesus is there. And they question Jesus. And what does Jesus do? He comes to this woman. When all the other people around her want to condemn her, Jesus comes to her defense. He dignifies her. He sees her. He protects her. And then he asks the crowd, who here is without sin? Who's got the right to condemn? And then it says, one by one, they all left until it was just Jesus and her. So I just want to say to you this morning that if you feel like the spotlight is on you, like you're the only one, Jesus said to the crowd, who here is without sin? Everyone left. You're not alone. You're not alone. But more importantly, the one whose voice matters the most, and the one who has the power to heal and restore you, he says, I do not condemn you. Verse 10, woman, Jesus says, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, sir, she said. Then neither do I condemn you. Jesus declared, go now and leave your life of sin. It's so beautiful. If you could hear the way Jesus speaks to you, it would change the way he responds. I know this word woman hits funny. It doesn't translate well for us. It's not like derogatory or casual. This is the same word he used to speak to his mom. This is the same language he spoke to his mother. This woman caught in adultery, Jesus speaks to her with such dignity, such respect. He doesn't see her as an object to be had, but an image bearer of God. And then he says, go and sin no more. And this is amazing. It's so beautiful what he's saying here. He's not saying, okay, now don't do it again. He's not like, just stop it, okay? I got you out of this one. That's not what he's saying. You see, Jesus never asks us to sort it out on our own. God walks with us. He's like a patient gardener at work in our lives, shaping us, forming us, transforming the garden of our souls to be more and more full of his life. But we often tell ourselves, in our brokenness, your future is wrecked. What you've done in the past, that will never leave you. Your future's doomed to the fate of your past. But Jesus says to this woman and to you and I, your future is still full of hope. That life of sin, leave it behind. I see a future for you, and it's full of hope and life and freedom. Your past does not define your future. You are a new creation. Jesus, through his life and his death and his resurrection, paid the debt of sin. He conquered it. He paid for your sin. He paid for my sin, so we could have his righteousness, his right relatedness with God. And he laid down his life so we could have a new life. And when we hear and believe that good news, that he is in the recreation business, well, then we find ourselves caught up in his kingdom life. Growing up, my dad used to write songs. Now he only writes songs for our kids. So Millie, Hudson, Mary, they all have their own songs. But he used to write songs about his faith, about Jesus, and he wrote a song about this story. And I always remember this song, but I didn't always understand it. And he wrote this song, and he takes the voice of the woman in the story. He tries to give language to her experience. And he wrote this. He wrote her speaking about seeing Jesus. There's something different about the look in his eyes. Speaking of the way Jesus looks at her, thinking about all the ways others have looked at her as an object with judgment, with shame, but not Jesus. There's something different about the look in his eyes. And then the song continues as if to answer the question, what is different about the look in his eyes? It's the love in his eyes. And if you could see the loves in the eyes of Jesus, whose words we're listening to today, it would melt your heart in the best way. It would heal the shame we feel, and it would embolden us to run to him and to trust him. And we have time to pray and receive communion and worship together still. And this moment is for you to reflect, to pray, to let someone in. And Jesus, the preacher on the mount, says this. He says, come to me, and be healed. Come and be set free. I do not condemn you.